Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back. Brandon again. Today I want to talk about the Strength Shop Bastard Squat Bar, which I got from Strength Shop USA, but I believe is available on all of their other sites as well. So if you're in Europe or something like that, you can probably get your hands on one. And it's interesting talking about squat bars because if you asked me about a year or so ago, I really wasn't that high on them. And yes, I'm talking about high-end squatting. How fitting in this case. But I had this very bad stereotype of who a squat bar was for. And what really came to mind was a old, fat powerlifter who tends to be a little bit out of shape, wears a lot of multi-ply gear, knee wraps, and probably doesn't squat to depth in a monolift in a weird federation. And unfortunately, I think a lot of other people had that stereotype too. And it didn't probably help that at the time, there wasn't also a lot on the marketplace in terms of brand availability. You know, outside the Texas Power Bar and some maybe Macedon $1,000 bars and maybe even a few Iron Wolf bars out there, there wasn't a lot of dedicated squat bars, at least that I was familiar with. Now, these days, 2019, things have changed. My stance on squat bars have changed. In fact, I own two of them. I've already done a review on a strong arm squat bar, which I'll leave in the description box below. But I think they're actually fitting for a lot of people. And there's a lot more in the marketplace where they're not going to necessarily break the bank. Now, why this might be important to you is especially if you compete in a federation like the USPA, which is very popular these days and uses specialty bars when it comes to squatting and deadlifting and a traditional power bar when it comes to benching. So it's competition grade equipment for a lot of people that might not necessarily have that old school stereotypical powerlifting style look or mindset about them. And I want to talk about that because again, even though I think that's who this bar was initially intended for, at least this type of bar, a lot of those things actually benefit normal lifters like yourself and myself especially. So with a squat bar, you typically find that it's much longer than a normal power bar. Again, I think the thought here was to allow bigger lifters with poor shoulder mobility to kind of set the bar appropriately and not worry about any kind of shoulder issues, especially if they're in a really tight suit or just generally out of shape and can't really move their shoulders that well. For me though, even though I have decent shoulder mobility when it comes to squatting and my hand placement, I've found the wider grip position actually works out really well in a rogue rack, which I know a lot of you guys have out there because rogue racks are 49 inches and depending on what type of power bar you generally have, or if you have like a competition style collar on there, you'll find the plates generally get pretty close to the uprights on a rogue rack. Because the squat bar is longer, it actually pushes the weights out further, which means that really no matter where the bar is centered or positioned in the rack when it's racked, walking out, you'll no longer clip the sides of the rack, which can be very disruptive for anybody, especially if you're going for a really heavy lift or a PR and you're really focused on actually doing the lift that you waste so much energy and it screws up your mind so much when you hit the rack that it can really sabotage you going forward. So the fact that this bar is longer really helps a normal lifter, especially if you have a rack where you find that you're clipping the sides on walkouts or racking very frequently. Now, as part of that, if you remember from some of my other deadlift bar videos that I did, which was also a longer bar, we talked about how that can also lead to more whip in the bar because the weight's further distributed out. Now, to combat that, these squat bars are typically thicker than normal barbells, where a deadlift bar might be 27 millimeters, a powerlifting bar is usually 29 millimeters. Most of these squat bars are 32 millimeters or thicker. So they're a thicker bar, which is going to kind of negate the length here and really negate some of that whip as well. So that's a benefit because you're not going to see that whip. But for me, I found the more volume or surface area of the bar itself means there's more surface area of the knurling, which means it's going to sit on my back a little bit better. And there's going to be more points of contact. So I find that generally a squat bar just feels better on my back. Now, speaking of feel and how this is on your back, let's talk about the knurl because that's something I always like to discuss. The knurl on a lot of these squat bars tends to be even on the more aggressive side than what you'll find on a lot of power bars, which I like a lot because it's going to dig into your back and really stay into place. That's an issue I've seen with some of these other bars out there, or if you've squatted with a power bar, which might have center knurling, but there are still some smooth parts of the bar of the shaft, which can lead to slipping. You'll see a lot of people chalk their back in competition to negate this. In training, they might be wearing A7 bar grip shirts, things of that nature. The knurl on this bar, number one, is fairly aggressive, which I like a lot. You can take a look at the knurl pattern here. I would consider this more of a volcano style, although it's not going to be as refined as something you might find on the Rogue Ohio Power Bar, for instance, but it's not extremely sharp. In contrast, if you take a look at the strong arm bar that I mentioned earlier, which again will be linked in the description box below, that's more of the mountain peak style knurl. So depending on how aggressive you like this to be, This is still aggressive, but I would say this is grippier than, let's say, something that's generally sharp. So if that makes sense, and I'll flash some images on the screen so you get a better idea of what the knurl looks like. One of my favorite things about this bar, which is really hard to come across in a lot of squat bars these days, or just bars in general, is the shaft is actually fully knurled. So no matter where you place this bar on your body, even if you're off center, so to say, and I'll talk about that in just a second, you're always going to have knurl along every single contact part of your back, which in my opinion is fantastic. That's great. It's awesome. I wish all squat bars did this, and not all of them do, unfortunately. Again, if you take a look at the strong arm bar, it does not have knurling everywhere, but it does have them generally in most places. This one has it everywhere. So I talked a little about centering as well. Let's talk about something else. You can probably tell on the screen. I think I'm probably just basically in frame here. If not, let me just kind of shift the bar a little bit so you can see. Shift it back, get it recentered. You might notice that this bar has a lot more rings on it than your normal barbell. So in fact, this one has 5 different rings. So it has your normal powerlifting ring marks, which again, I think are just off of frame, but you're familiar with those. They're on every single powerlifting bar you've probably ever used. It also has a center knurl ring, so that way if you're getting under the bar and lining up and having someone help set you up, you can ensure that you're always in the center of the bar. One of the things I will say this also helps with, just for me in general, because again, this bar is longer than normal, and the fact that I generally use roller cups for my rack so I can always position the bar as center. Sometimes, even though I think the bar is centered, because this is so much longer and I'm not running into the sleeves as quickly as I would with a power bar, I could potentially be a little bit off center otherwise. So I can always make sure with this center knurl mark that I'm always in the center where I need to be, obviously to set myself up for as much success as possible. You will also notice though, there are 2 other knurl marks right here for rings. And what this is actually going to do is denote where on a typical barbell, the knurling would start. Now, this might not seem like a big thing to a lot of you, but if you talk to someone who takes a narrow grip, they usually will use the start of the knurling in order to position their hands instead of someone using the actual powerlifting ring marks or whatnot. So this just gives you another guide point that if you usually use where the knurling starts to set up, this is just an easier way to go about doing it. But other than that, like I said, it's fully knurled and the knurl is really good on this bar. I like it a lot. Now, speaking about other things on this bar, there's not that much to say actually. The collars and sleeves themselves are longer than normal. Again, this is to allow for more weight to go on the bar. One of the things that Strength Shop does that I really like that you'll sometimes find on other bars is they actually put a little rubber ring, almost like a wristband, around the actual collar itself. It's built in, so it's not sticking up. But I like how they do this on their bars as they did with their Strength Shop Bastard Power Bar that I had and reviewed, and I'll probably throw that in the description box as well. That one had a red band around it. This one has a black one. I'd be curious to see if their deadlift bar, if they have a deadlift bar, has something similar, because that could always make it easier to identify bars, especially if it's in a gym and you wanted to note, hey, this is a specific bar for a specific purpose. Don't use a bar with a red band on a bicep curl, for example. Just random things thrown out there, because I have seen people curl with deadlift bars before. So I do like that touch. I think it adds a lot to it. The bar itself, as you can see, it actually has a really nice finish. It uses electroless nickel. And I say it's really nice because that's actually the highest quality finish you can get from, let's say, Kabuki. So I have the same finish on my Kabuki Power Bar, electroless nickel, as I do here on this Strength Shop squat bar. So I'm assuming it's going to hold up very well because my Kabuki bar has as well. It's not as nice as, let's say, stainless steel, but outside of Rogue right now, there are no stainless steel squat bars that I'm aware of. So this is a very higher end finish compared to what you normally find. Now, speaking of what you normally find, I think the gold standard is probably the Texas Power Bar. And by that, I mean Texas Squat Bar, but the brand is Texas Power Bars. A little confusing. I think they need to get some work on their marketing department, but it's another story. The Texas Squat Bar is probably, in my opinion, the most popular one. That's the one I see out there most frequently. To get that bar in the lowest level finish, which is bare steel, so a bare steel shaft with bare steel sleeves, with shipping is going to cost you still probably around $440 or so when it's all said and done. Now, I say that's important because if you remember from the beginning of the video, I said a year or two ago, the only options out there were fairly expensive. So just to get your foot in the door, $440 so, and that's for a bare steel bar. And bare steel rust is a kind of a pain in the butt to keep up with. So it can be a little bit difficult for most people. This particular bar, as I mentioned, a lot of great specs, fully knurled shaft, good aggressive knurling on it with the electroless nickel finish, retails for $395 shipped within the US. And Strength Shop has a lot of sales frequently and discount codes that I'm sure you can find. Like if you sign up for their email, I think you get like 10 or 15% off. And they run other sales throughout the course of the year where I've seen this bar for as low as $330, which is, again, fairly cheap considering everything you're getting. Now, other competition out there, I mentioned the Strong Arm bar that I reviewed earlier. That one at the time of review was $250. It has since gone up. One of the things you'll notice with some of the imported brands from China, as the tariffs and whatnot change, so there's a lot of the overseas pricing, and that is turned onto us as consumers. That Strong Arm Sport bar now retails for about $300. And again, that's probably your lowest entry point, but that's not as nice of a finish, and it doesn't have as full of a knurl on it. One of the benefits potentially to that bar, though, is that the knurl itself is more aggressive and more sharp. But again, that's more personal preference of what you like. Now, I mentioned Rogue, I mentioned stainless steel. I like to talk about Rogue, obviously, in most of my videos, as you guys have probably noticed. The Rogue squat bar, which is very similar to this, being fully knurled, a lot of the same specs in terms of length and all that, and how much it weighs, which, by the way, is 55 pounds or 25 kilograms. The Rogue bar in stainless steel, before shipping and tax, retails for $445. If I were to plug in that cost for me and add those things in, it's going to end up being roughly around $470 or so. So about $80, $90 more as a base price for this. But again, you can get this for sale, but you are getting a stainless steel finish, which is, in my opinion, the best finish you can get based off of the feel you get for the knurl, because there's no real coating between you and the barbell. Not to mention how little you'll have to clean it because it has the most resistance to corrosion. So this bar itself is kind of right in the middle. It's more of an entry-level squat bar, but you get a lot of the bigger bang finishes on it. And I think if you're interested, if you're squatting in a Rogue rack, if you're competing in a federation that uses, squat bars, or if you just have extra money and are looking for a fun specialty bar to use, I really think that this bar is worth taking a look at, as is squat bars in general. Now, should you buy this over, let's say, a deadlift bar, over a safety squat bar, over some other type of specialty bar? That's really going to depend on you and your training. I would probably be of the opinion there are other barbells to get first. But again, given the fact that if you compete in a federation that uses one and are looking for a good bar for a Rogue rack or a rack that you hit the uprights on frequently walking out, I think it's a low cost of entry to have something that's a really great training tool and actually works out really well. So if you have other questions on this bar or any of the other equipment I have on here, leave those in the comment section below. But in the meantime, as always, thanks for watching and stay big.